The rain hadn't let up for hours. It streaked the windows of the moving truck in steady rivulets, blurring the view of the winding country road into an endless smear of grey and green. Ethan Carmichael hunched over the steering wheel, his knuckles pale. Claire sat beside him, wrapped in an oversized cardigan, her hands cradling a lukewarm thermos of coffee. Neither of them spoke much. They had been on the road for 5 hours, and exhaustion tugged at the edges of their nerves. The house sat at the very end of Laurel Hollow Road, past abandoned fields and crumbling stone walls swallowed by creeping ivy. As they approached, Claire leaned forward, her breath fogging the glass. "There it is," she said, voice lifting with cautious excitement. Ethan slowed the truck and pulled into the driveway. It was long and choked with weeds, the gravel barely visible beneath patches of moss. Towering oaks loomed on either side, their bare branches clawing at the stormy sky. The house itself was enormous, a hulking relic from the late 1800s. The paint, once a proud blue, had faded and peeled like shedding skin. The shutters hung crooked, some missing entirely. The porch sagged in the middle, and the front door, a massive thing of dark wood, was adorned with heavy iron fittings that looked almost medieval. Claire didn't seem to notice the decay. She was already fumbling with her seatbelt, practically bouncing in her seat. "Come on, Ethan, it's perfect." He hesitated, staring at the place. A chill ran down his spine, one that had nothing to do with the weather. Perfect. It looked like something from a gothic horror movie. But he reminded himself why they had done this. The city was strangling them, rent had become a noose, and this house, unbelievably, had cost less than a studio apartment in downtown Boston. "Character," Claire had said when they first saw the listing. "Old houses have soul." Now, standing in the downpour, Ethan wasn't so sure the soul of this house would be a friendly one. They wrestled open the truck's back door and began unloading. Claire carried boxes inside, humming tunelessly, while Ethan lugged in the heavier pieces. Every step on the porch felt like it might send him crashing through rotten boards. Inside, the house smelled strongly of damp wood and something subtler, a faint metallic tang, like old blood. The entryway was grand in a way modern homes could never replicate. A sweeping staircase rose before them, its banister carved with intricate patterns that time and neglect had worn down. The walls were covered in faded floral wallpaper, peeling at the edges like sunburnt skin. Cobwebs hung like lace in the corners. Claire set down a box marked "Kitchen" and turned in a slow circle, eyes wide. "Can you believe it? Look at this place. It's like living in history." Ethan wiped rain from his face and set a heavy crate down with a grunt. "Yeah," he said, "history." The afternoon slipped into evening unnoticed. They didn't bother unpacking much, just the essentials. They unrolled a battered old mattress onto the floor of the master bedroom upstairs, their bed frame and furniture still buried in the moving truck. The bedroom had a fireplace, non-functional, the realtor had warned, and tall, narrow windows that stared out into the woods. As darkness fell and the storm raged on, the house seemed to groan and shift around them, the sounds of settling amplified in the cavernous silence. After a simple dinner of takeout sandwiches, they collapsed onto the mattress, exhausted. Claire fell asleep almost immediately, curled under a thick quilt. Ethan lay awake for a while, listening to the unfamiliar noises. The drip of water from somewhere inside the walls, the occasional creak of the floorboards expanding and contracting. With the temperature, just as he was starting to drift off, he heard it. Tap, tap, tap. He sat up, heart pounding. It hadn't come from the roof or the windows. It had sounded like knocking on the front door. Ethan strained his ears, silence, except for the storm. He lay back down, telling himself it was nothing. Just the house, the wind, maybe, a tree branch swaying against the siding. Nothing to worry about. He repeated it like a mantra until sleep finally pulled him under. The clock in the hallway chimed softly. 2 slow, hollow notes. AM. Ethan jerked awake. For a moment he didn't know where he was, the ceiling above him unfamiliar, cracked and yellowed with age. Claire's soft breathing came from his right, a reassuring anchor in the darkness. He shifted slightly, trying not to wake her, and listened. The house was whispering. He told himself it was just the storm. The old place had countless nooks and crannies for the wind to rattle through after all. Still, there was a persistent hum underneath the obvious noises, something that didn't quite fit, almost like voices, too low to understand, but unmistakably human. He sat up, straining. His ears. The whispers faded the moment he moved, like shy things disappearing back into the woodwork. He rubbed his face, sighed, and lay back down. Just his imagination. First night jitters. Old houses were notorious for their peculiar symphonies. Then came the knock, tap, tap, tap. It was soft, almost polite, but insistent. Ethan's heart climbed into his throat. He sat bolt upright, staring at the bedroom door, half expecting it to creak open. Claire shifted beside him, but didn't wake. The knock came again, a little louder this time. 3 deliberate raps, definitely at the front door. He threw the covers off and swung his legs over the side of the mattress. The air was icy against his bare skin, and the floorboards were cold enough to make him wince. He stumbled into his sneakers and grabbed the heavy flashlight they'd left on the nightstand. Its beam cut a narrow path through the gloom as he crept to the door. The hallway stretched before him like a tunnel. The wallpaper seemed darker now, the flowers twisting into something more sinister in the low light. He forced himself forward step by step, the wood groaning underfoot. At the top of the staircase he paused, shone the flashlight down. The front door stood there, looming, its surface slick with rainwater, where the storm gusted through the old frame. No one was there. Of course not, he told himself. It's 2 in the damn morning. Who would be out here in this weather? Still, something gnawed at him. That knock. It hadn't sounded like wood creaking or a branch brushing the siding. It had sounded deliberate, rhythmic, human. He descended the stairs slowly. His flashlight wavered, briefly illuminating the living room to the left, the piles of still-packed boxes, the empty fireplace with its yawning black mouth. At the foot of the stairs he stopped again. The knock came a third time. Tap, tap, tap. This time. It was so loud he flinched, nearly dropping the flashlight. Ethan swung the beam to the front door. Nothing but the old wood, shimmering slightly from the damp. He moved closer, heartbeat hammering in his ears, pressed his eye to the peephole. At first, he saw nothing. Just rain and the dense darkness of the forest across the lawn. But as he stared, something flickered at the edge of his vision. A movement, fast and low, skimming along the ground. He jerked back instinctively. He stood there for a long moment, breathing hard. Finally, swallowing his fear, he reached out and flipped the heavy brass deadbolt. The lock turned with a protesting squeal. He cracked the door open 2 inches. The cold slapped him in the face, sharp and immediate. He shoved the door wider and peered into the night. The porch was deserted. Water pooled in the uneven boards. The truck sat hunched and glistening at the edge of the driveway. Beyond it, the trees thrashed under the assault of the wind. Nobody, nothing. Feeling foolish, Ethan shut the door firmly and slid the bolt back into place. As he turned away, his flashlight swept across the floor, and he froze. There, right in front of the door, were wet footprints, small, barefoot and muddy, leading from the threshold into the house. He stumbled back a step, his breath catching. He scanned the room wildly, the narrow beam of light jittering over boxes and peeling wallpaper. Nothing, no sounds, no movement. He stood there for what felt like an eternity, waiting for something, anything, to happen. When nothing did, he forced himself to breathe again. He shook his head, willing the adrenaline to ebb. Claire's going to think I'm losing it, he muttered under his breath. Carefully, he backtracked up the stairs, keeping the flashlight trained ahead of him. He avoided looking too long at the walls. He didn't want to see what his imagination might conjure there. When he finally reached the bedroom, Claire was still asleep, curled into a tight ball beneath the quilt. He hesitated at the door, then slipped inside and shut it quietly behind him. He set the flashlight back on the nightstand and climbed under the covers, shivering uncontrollably despite the warmth. Claire stirred slightly. Her hand found his under the blanket and squeezed. A sleepy, unconscious gesture. Ethan closed his eyes, willing sleep to take him. It didn't come easily. Long after Claire's breathing evened out again, he lay awake, staring into the darkness, listening, waiting, because he knew, deep in his gut, deep in some ancient primal part of him, that the knocking hadn't been a mistake. Someone, or something, had come to their door tonight, and worse, it had come inside. Morning came reluctantly. The sky remained a smudged grey, the rain tapering off into a fine mist that hovered over the soaked earth. Ethan awoke feeling as if he hadn't slept at all. His body was leaden, his mind fogged. Claire was already up, padding around the house somewhere, her movements muffled by the thick, ancient walls. Ethan lay still for a moment, staring at the cracked ceiling. Had last night really happened? Had he really heard the knocking, opened the door, and seen those wet footprints? It felt unreal now, dreamlike. Still, when he finally hauled himself out of bed and crossed to the door, he hesitated. He opened it slowly, half expecting, half dreading, to find more muddy prints leading deeper into the house, but there was nothing. The hallway looked just as it had yesterday, peeling wallpaper, creaky floorboards, the faint, lingering smell of damp wood. Ethan shook his head, chiding himself for letting the place get under his skin. Old houses made noise. Old houses played tricks. It was part of their charm, Claire would say. He found her downstairs in the kitchen, unpacking boxes. She was humming under her breath, a half-forgotten pop song from years ago, tapping her foot against the cracked tile floor. Morning, Ethan croaked. She looked up and smiled, brushing a stray curl behind her ear. Finally awake, Sleeping Beauty. Coffee's almost ready. Ethan accepted the chipped mug she handed him and took a grateful sip. The coffee was strong and bitter, exactly what he needed to clear the lingering cobwebs from his mind. "You sleep okay?" Claire asked, wiping dust off. A stack of plates. Ethan hesitated. "Yeah, mostly," he lied. She shot him a curious glance but didn't press. Claire had always been good at reading when he wasn't ready to talk. They spent the morning arranging the kitchen and dining room. Claire bustled from room to room, chattering about paint colours and curtain ideas, the house's strangeness seemingly forgotten. Ethan tried to match her energy, but he kept finding his gaze drawn to the front door. It looked ordinary now, harmless. Still, he couldn't shake the memory of those footprints. After lunch, Claire went outside to check the backyard. "There's supposed to be a garden," she called over her shoulder. "Maybe we can bring it back to life." Ethan stayed behind, claiming he wanted to finish unpacking some boxes. When she was gone, the house grew still again. Too still. Ethan decided to inspect the front door. He approached it cautiously, flashlight in hand, even though it was broad daylight. He shined the beam around the base of the doorframe, checking the floor. No footprints now, just dry, scuffed wood. He opened the door and stepped out onto the porch. The boards groaned under his weight, and the damp air hit him immediately, heavy with the smell of wet earth. Nothing unusual. No strange marks. No sign of anyone. Feeling slightly ridiculous, he closed the door and locked it, Maybe it had been a nightmare after all. They spent the rest of the day assembling furniture, arranging the living room, and arguing amiably over where to hang a series of vintage travel posters Claire had collected. The normalcy of the day began to soothe Ethan's nerves. The house felt almost cozy in the afternoon light, the storm's fury a distant memory. By nightfall, they had made real progress. The living room was habitable and the kitchen was nearly organized. Claire had even found an old radio in one of the closets upstairs, a heavy, dust-covered relic from the 1950s, and coaxed it into life. Scratchy classical music filled the background as they ate dinner on the floor, laughing over cheap wine and sandwiches. Later, while Claire showered, Ethan tidied up. He stacked the empty boxes by the front door, swept the kitchen floor, and straightened the living room. As he moved around, he noticed something odd. One of the posters they had hung, a bright, colourful print of the Amalfi Coast, was missing. He frowned. They had definitely put it up earlier. He remembered struggling with the stubborn old nail, and Claire teasing him for being hopeless with hammers. He checked the floor, thinking maybe it had fallen, but it wasn't there. He checked behind the couch. Nothing. Puzzled, he went upstairs to check the bedroom. Maybe Claire had moved it. As he passed the narrow hallway leading to the guest room, something made him stop. The door to the guest room was ajar. They hadn't gone in there yet. The room was still piled high with old furniture and dusty trunks left behind by the previous owners. Claire had even joked about it being too creepy to deal with until they were settled. Ethan approached the door slowly. The air felt colder here, as if the house itself were holding its breath. He pushed the door open. The room was dim, lit only by the weak glow of the hallway bulb behind him. Dust motes danced in the stale air. At first, he saw nothing unusual, just the cluttered mess of old dressers, moth-eaten curtains, and sagging cardboard boxes. Then he saw it, propped against the far wall, half hidden behind an ancient rocking chair, was the missing Amalfi Coast poster. His blood turned to ice. He crossed the room in 3 long strides and snatched it up. His hands were trembling. How had it gotten here? They hadn't even opened this room. He turned in a slow circle, heart pounding. No signs of anyone, no footprints, nothing. Just the creak of the old rocking chair shifting slightly on its own as, if nudged by an unseen hand, Ethan backed out of the room, slammed the door shut, and leaned against it, breathing hard. Claire's footsteps sounded on the stairs. A moment later she appeared, wrapped in a towel, her hair dripping. "Everything okay?" she asked, frowning at him. Ethan forced a smile. "Yeah, just weird draft in there." He didn't tell her about the poster, not yet, that night, as he lay beside Claire, staring into the darkness. He made a decision. Tomorrow, he would find the attic, check every inch of this house. Because something was wrong. Something was moving things. And deep down, Ethan was starting to fear it wasn't trying to be noticed yet, it was just getting comfortable. The next morning dawned colder. A fine mist clung to the trees beyond the windows, blurring them into vague skeletal outlines. Ethan woke, with the same feeling of unease coiling tight in his chest, thicker now, almost heavy. Claire was still asleep, her face buried in the pillow. Ethan slipped out of bed quietly, careful not to disturb her. Today, he had a mission. He pulled on jeans and a hoodie, grabbed the flashlight again and made his way down the hall. The air in the house was cool and damp, carrying a faint smell of mold and something sharper underneath. Something faintly metallic. He ignored it. At the end of the hallway beyond the guest room was a narrow, almost hidden door. It was painted, the same color as the wall, and if you didn't know it was there, you might miss it entirely. Yesterday, in the chaos of unpacking, he hadn't paid much attention to it. But now it seemed to draw his eye, an itch he couldn't ignore. Ethan approached and tried the handle, locked. He frowned. They hadn't been given a key for it. The realtor had said nothing about a locked room. Curious, he knelt to examine the lock itself. It wasn't a modern one. It was old, brass, worn smooth by decades of use. His fingers brushed something carved into the wood just above the knob, tiny, almost invisible unless you were looking for it. He leaned closer. A symbol. A circle with a single vertical line bisecting it. Simple, but strange. Not anything he'd seen before. He ran a thumb over it, a shiver running up his spine. Whatever was behind this door, the previous owners had wanted it kept shut. Badly. He tried finding something that might force the lock, a butter knife from the kitchen, a bent coat hanger from the closet, but the old lock was surprisingly stubborn. After a few frustrated minutes, he gave up and went looking for another way in. Maybe there was a key somewhere. He remembered the attic. In old houses, the attic often held forgotten treasures and junk. Maybe a key was hidden up there among the dust and relics. He found the attic door at the far end of the second floor, past a warren of tiny storage rooms and narrow hallways. It was a simple pull-down hatch with a fraying rope dangling from the ceiling. He gave the rope a cautious tug. The door groaned open with a puff of stale air, and the ladder unfolded jerkily, one rung nearly snapping under its own weight. Ethan wrinkled his nose against the smell. Old wood, mildew, and something deeper, earthier, gripping the sides of the ladder. He climbed carefully upward. The attic was a vast, dim space with a sharply pitched roof. The only light came from a small, grimy window at the far end, barely enough to see by. His flashlight cast long, shuddering shadows across the room. Old trunks, broken chairs, picture frames, and cardboard boxes cluttered the space in chaotic heaps. Dust lay thick on every surface. He picked his way through carefully, checking the labels on boxes when he could. Most were filled with mundane items, clothes yellowed with age, books swollen and warped by damp, cracked toys, missing eyes and limbs. But near the back, he found something different, a large wooden chest, much older than the rest of the clutter. It was locked too, but the latch was rusted and broke off easily when he pried at it with the handle of the flashlight. Inside were papers, dozens of them. Yellowed sheets covered in cramped, spidery handwriting. He picked one up and squinted at it. Journal entries. The dates were old, 1912, 1913, and the writing was frantic, uneven. He skimmed a few lines. The door is not to be opened after midnight. Knocking again, always 3 times, it waits. I moved the mirror, it was angry. Mother says to ignore it, but I can feel it watching from the door. Ethan's blood ran cold. He dug deeper into the chest and found more drawings, symbols, crude maps of the house, all centering around a particular spot, the narrow hallway where the locked door stood. There was even a key, a small, heavy iron, key tied to a faded scrap of ribbon. Heart hammering, Ethan pocketed the key and stuffed a handful of papers into his sweatshirt. He didn't dare take too much. He didn't want Claire to notice yet. Not until he understood more. He backed away from the chest, his skin crawling. Something up here didn't want to be disturbed. He could feel it. The air pressed against his skin like a too-wet blanket, dense and uncomfortable. Shadows seemed to twist at the edges of his vision. He practically scrambled down the ladder and shoved the attic door closed behind him, heart racing. Claire was downstairs when he found her, unpacking a box of dishes and humming to herself again. She looked up and smiled. Find anything interesting? Ethan forced a grin. Old junk, nothing special. He didn't want to scare her. Not yet. Not until he figured out what was behind that door. That afternoon, while Claire went into town for groceries, Ethan stood once again before the locked door in the hallway. The key felt heavy in his hand, almost warm. He slid it into the lock. It fit perfectly. He hesitated, every instinct screaming at him to leave it shut, to forget about it. But curiosity and fear pushed him onward. He turned the key. The lock clicked open with a noise that sounded disturbingly like a sigh. Ethan swallowed hard, reached for the doorknob, and pushed the door inward. The hinges shrieked. Inside was a short, narrow passageway, lined with dark wood paneling. It sloped downward slightly, disappearing into darkness. A faint, rotten smell wafted out, mold, damp earth, and something sharper. Ethan hesitated at the threshold. Something was whispering, soft and indistinct, just at the edge of hearing. Not the house shifting, not the wind. Voices, whispering his name. He stepped back quickly and slammed the door shut, chest heaving. He locked it again and backed away down the hallway, not turning his back on it until he reached the bedroom. The whispers faded, but he knew, deep in his gut, that he'd woken something. That door wasn't locked to keep people out. It was locked to keep something in, and now it knew he was here. That night, the house felt different, not just old and creaky, but alive, breathing, watching. Ethan couldn't shake the sensation, even as he and Claire curled up on the couch after dinner, the radio crackling softly in the background. They watched a movie, but Ethan barely registered it. His gaze kept drifting to the hallway beyond the living room, where the locked door now sat like a rotting tooth in the house's mouth. It was still shut, still locked. He had made sure of that. And yet, he could almost hear it. A low, steady thrum, like a heartbeat behind the wood, waiting. Later they went to bed. Claire, exhausted, drifted off quickly. Her breathing was soft and steady beside him. Ethan lay awake, staring at the ceiling. Every creak of the house felt loaded, every sigh of the wind a whisper in his ear. He finally dozed off sometime after midnight, though he never quite fell deeply asleep. His dreams were strange, full of long, endless hallways and doors that wouldn't stay shut. Every time he tried to walk away, he heard it. Knock, 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 always 3 times, always just behind him. He jerked awake to silence. The clock on the nightstand read 2:47 a.m. At first, he wasn't sure what had woken him. The house was utterly still, too still. He shifted under the covers, trying not to wake Claire. That's when he heard it. Knock, 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 soft, deliberate. Coming from downstairs. Ethan's blood froze. He sat up slowly, listening. Another set of knocks, softer now, almost tentative, like whoever, or whatever, was doing it, was testing something. Claire stirred beside him but didn't wake. Ethan swung his legs over the edge of the bed, moving carefully, quietly. Every instinct screamed at him to stay put, but he couldn't. He had to see. He crept out of the bedroom, down the hallway. The house stretched out before him like a dark throat, swallowing all light. The knocking came again. Knock, knock, knock. Definitely from the front door. For a crazy moment, Ethan thought about waking Claire, but he knew, somehow, that this was for him. That calling her would only make it worse. He made his way down the stairs, each step creaking under his weight. The living room was bathed in blue light from the street lamp outside, its beams fractured by the old, rippled glass of the windows. At the far end of the room, the front door stood silent and unmoving. Ethan approached slowly, his heart hammering so loudly he was sure whoever was on the other side could hear it. He reached out and touched the doorknob. It was freezing. Another knock sounded, this time directly against the wood, not the frame, closer, stronger. Ethan yanked his hand back instinctively. The knocking came again, but now, horrifyingly, it wasn't coming from the front door anymore. It was coming from inside the house, somewhere down the hall, near the locked door. He turned, heart in his throat, and stared into the darkness. Something moved, a shadow, just at the edge of his vision. flickering like a candle flame. Gone when he looked directly at it. The whispering started again, rising like a cold wind through the hallway. Soft, at first, then louder, urgent. Ethan backed away toward the kitchen, his hands groping blindly for something, anything, he could use as a weapon. His fingers closed around a heavy metal candlestick. Another knock. This time against the kitchen door. Knock, knock, knock. Ethan whipped around, raising the candlestick. Nothing there. The kitchen was empty, silent, except for the hum of the old refrigerator. But he could feel it. Something was here, watching, waiting. He tightened his grip on the candlestick and backed toward the stairs. The house around him seemed to groan, not from age, but from strain, as if something huge and unseen was pressing against its walls, trying to get in or trying to get out. He turned and bolted up the stairs, taking them two at a time. Behind him, the knocking continued, moving impossibly fast. From the front, door to the living room walls, the ceiling, the floor beneath his feet. A sound like hands slapping and clawing, desperate and hungry. He slammed the bedroom door behind him, locking it with shaking hands. Claire sat up, startled awake. "Ethan? What the hell?" He crossed the room in 3 strides and pressed, his back against the door, listening. The knocking stopped. Silence. For a moment, there was only the sound of his own ragged breathing. Claire scrambled out of bed and came to his side. "What's going on?" she whispered, clutching his arm. Ethan shook his head, unable to speak. The house seemed to listen with them. Every muscle in his body screamed at him to move, to hide, to fight. But nothing happened. Minutes passed. Then, just as he was starting to think maybe it was over, he heard it. A single, deliberate knock. Not against the bedroom door. Against the window. The second-story window. Ethan and Claire turned together, their movements slow, unwilling. The curtains fluttered slightly, as if touched by a breeze. Beyond them, the window pane was fogged with moisture, and in the center of the glass, perfectly formed, were 3 long, wet streaks, as if someone, or something, had dragged their fingers down the outside. Claire gasped and clutched his arm tighter. Ethan moved forward, heart hammering against his ribs. He wiped the glass with the sleeve of his sweatshirt, clearing. The fog. There was nothing outside, only the mist, only the skeletal trees, only darkness. But the streaks remained. Fresh. Wet. Real. Claire whispered, "What is happening?" Ethan didn't answer. He couldn't, because deep down he already knew the knocking wasn't random. It wasn't someone playing tricks. It was an invitation. Something was asking to be let in, and he was starting to think he had already said yes. The next morning the house felt wrong. There was no better word for it. The walls seemed to lean subtly inward. The floors creaked even when no one moved. Claire made breakfast, her movements stiff and mechanical, like someone acting out the memory of a routine. Ethan sat at the kitchen table staring into his coffee. Neither of them spoke about the night before. Not yet. It hung between them, thick and heavy as the mist that still clung outside the windows. Finally, Claire said in a small voice, "We should leave." Ethan looked up sharply. He wanted to agree. God, he wanted to. But something inside him, something deeper than logic or fear, held him back. A part of him was tethered to the house now. It wasn't curiosity anymore. It was need. He shook his head slowly. "Not yet. I need to know what it wants." Claire's face twisted in a mix of fear and anger. "Ethan!" A loud crash cut her off. They both flinched. It came from the living room. Heart hammering, Ethan grabbed the candlestick again. Claire stayed close behind him as they moved cautiously down the hall. The living room was a mess. The heavy mirror that had hung above the fireplace, an ornate thing with a frame of carved black wood, lay shattered on the floor. Shards of glass glittered like ice across the carpet. But it wasn't the broken mirror that made Ethan's stomach lurch. It was what was reflected in the shards. Each fragment of mirror showed something slightly wrong. In the largest piece, Ethan saw the living room, but the windows were bricked up, and the furniture was wrong, older, Victorian style, cloaked in sheets. In another shard, the reflection showed the hallway, but instead of sunlight slanting through, there was only darkness, thick and impenetrable. In a tiny sliver near his foot, he saw himself, but his reflection was grinning, wide and malicious, even though his own face remained grim. He knelt carefully, peering closer. The reflections moved independently. They twitched. They shuddered. They didn't match the world around him anymore. Claire backed away, hands clamped over her mouth. "This is wrong," she whispered. "This isn't natural." Ethan nodded slowly. He felt it too, a pulling sensation, as if the broken mirror wasn't just reflecting, but reaching out, trying to drag them inside. Carefully, he picked up the largest shard. The reflection within it writhed. The room inside was no longer empty. A figure stood there, tall, thin, draped, in something that wasn't quite clothing but rather wrapped darkness. It had no face, only a stretched, pale expanse where features should have been. It raised one hand slowly, and the fingers, too long, too many, brushed against the inside of the shard. Ethan dropped the glass with a strangled gasp. It hit the floor and shattered. Further, the figure was gone. Claire grabbed his hand. "We have to go. Now." He didn't argue this time. They sprinted upstairs, grabbing essentials, phones, wallets, shoes, anything they could carry quickly. But when Ethan yanked open the front door, his breath caught. There was no outside, where there should have been their front yard, the driveway, the street beyond. There was only mist. Thick, roiling mist. No shape, no sound, no end. He slammed the door shut again. Claire was shaking her head, tears brimming in her eyes. "This isn't possible. It's not real." A soft whisper interrupted her. Both of them froze. It came from upstairs. The whispering had returned, louder now, almost eager. Calling. Claire clutched his arm, nails digging into his skin. "What do we do?" Ethan swallowed. Hard. He didn't know, but he couldn't ignore the certainty blooming in his gut. The house wouldn't let them leave. Not until it was finished with them. He pulled Claire toward the stairs. "We need to find the source," he said, barely recognizing his own voice. She stared at him like he'd lost his mind, but she followed. They crept up the staircase. Every step a groan of protest beneath their feet. The upstairs hallway stretched before them, wrong, distorted somehow. The angles sharper, the shadows deeper. Ethan noticed something else too. The mirrors. Every hallway mirror, every framed photo with glass, every polished surface. They all rippled faintly. The reflections inside them moved independently. Figures darted just out of sight. Once, he caught a clear glimpse of Claire, but twisted, her eyes black hollows and her mouth sewn shut. He squeezed his eyes shut and kept moving. The whispering grew louder as they approached the end of the hall. The door they had locked the day before, the midnight door. It stood slightly ajar, not open wide, just cracked. Enough for darkness to seep through. The iron key was still in the lock, hanging heavy and accusing. Ethan's skin crawled. Something had come through. Something had been invited. Claire tugged at his arm, voice trembling. "We need to shut it." Ethan nodded, though every fiber of his being rebelled against getting closer. He edged forward, candlestick raised. The door creaked wider at his approach. swinging open with a sound like a sigh. The hallway beyond sloped, sharply downward, ending in a black, yawning mouth of another door, this one made entirely of mirror, a mirror door. It pulsed faintly, like a heartbeat, and in the reflective surface, Ethan could see hundreds of hands pressing against it from the other side, small hands, old hands, broken, clawed, desperate, reaching. The whispering rose to a fever pitch. Ethan staggered back, slamming the narrow door shut with all his strength. It groaned and resisted, as if something on the other side was pushing back. Claire rushed forward, helping him. Together, they shoved until the door clicked shut. Ethan turned the key, locking it once more. The whispering stopped, instantly. The silence that fell was deafening. They backed away, breathing hard. Claire wiped tears from her face with, "Shaking hands, what do we do now?" she whispered. Ethan didn't answer immediately. His mind whirled with fragments of the journal he had found in the attic, the warnings, the drawings, the old rituals. There was more he hadn't read yet, and somehow he knew. The key to surviving this wasn't leaving. It was understanding and finishing what someone else had started long ago. He squeezed Claire's hand, forcing steadiness into his voice. "We find the rest of the journal," he said, "and we end this." Claire nodded, though fear still shone bright in her eyes. Together they turned away from the midnight door and the mirror beyond, and prepared to go back into the depths of the house. The real fight was just beginning, and the house was waking up. The attic door loomed ahead, half hidden behind a faded tapestry at the end of the upstairs hall. Ethan had noticed it before, but dismissed it. It was just an attic after all. But now everything had changed. The house had shown them its teeth. It was time to fight back. He and Claire stood before the narrow door, their hands brushing against each other, grounding themselves. Neither spoke. Words felt small against the enormity of what waited above. Ethan reached for the pull cord. The trapdoor creaked open reluctantly, exhaling a gust of dust-choked air. A narrow staircase unfolded downward, not upward as Ethan had expected. Claire frowned. "That's wrong." Ethan nodded grimly. "Nothing in this house is right." He clicked on the heavy flashlight he had grabbed from the kitchen drawer. Its beam cut a narrow tunnel of light through the darkness. Together, they descended. The attic wasn't what he expected. No low beams or dusty boxes. Instead, they entered a wide, almost cathedral-like space, the ceiling lost in shadows high. Above, the air cold and strangely clean. The walls were lined with bookshelves, ancient, warped under the weight of countless leather-bound tomes. Every available surface was cluttered with yellowed papers, glass jars filled with murky liquids, and strange symbols carved into the wood. In the center of the attic stood a table. Upon it lay a thick, crumbling journal, the same one Ethan had found before. But now it looked more complete, as if pages had materialized that weren't there before. Beside it was something else, a mirror, small, hand-held, framed in tarnished silver. Its surface rippled faintly even in the still air. Claire whispered, "Is it watching us?" Ethan didn't answer. He didn't want to give the thought weight. Instead, he crossed to the table and opened the journal carefully. The writing inside was frantic, cramped, as if penned by a hand that trembled with fear. The reflections are the first to go. They slip through mirrors, through glass, replacing the living bit by bit. Do not look too long. Do not answer when they knock. The house was built to contain her. She is trapped in the glass door. 3 keys: body, blood, and mirror. All must remain separate. If she walks free, the world beyond this house will not survive. Ethan's mouth went dry. Claire read over his shoulder, her breath shallow. "What does it mean?" she asked. He turned a page. A rough, shaky sketch filled the space. A woman, if it could be called that, all sharp angles and flowing shadows. Her eyes were black pits, and her mouth stretched far too wide across her face, filled with rows of needle-like teeth. Beneath the drawing, more writing. Her name was lost before memory. She devours reflection, devours soul. The house feeds her. The doors are her mouth. Never answer the midnight door. Claire backed away, one hand pressed to her mouth. "This is insane," she said, voice cracking. "It's not real." But it was. Ethan could feel it. The house itself seemed to hum with a low, eager frequency, as if listening, waiting. He turned another page, more sketches. Diagrams this time, symbols, circles, words in a language he didn't recognize, and at the bottom, instructions written in desperate, spidery letters. To seal the door again, find the 3 keys. Perform the mirror rite. Do not falter. Do not look her in the eyes. Claire hugged herself. What keys? Where are they? As if in answer, the attic creaked deeply, a noise that reverberated through their bones. The mirror on the table trembled, and in its depths, Ethan saw something moving. A pale face, featureless, drifting just beneath the surface. He covered the mirror with a scrap of cloth immediately. Claire clutched his arm. "We need to get out of here." Ethan closed the journal and tucked it under his arm. He nodded. But as they turned toward the staircase, they both froze. The attic wasn't empty anymore. At the far end, something moved. A shape, tall and thin, peeled itself from the shadows, its head tilted unnaturally to the side, studying them. Ethan and Claire backed toward the stairs, not daring to blink. The figure didn't move closer. It simply watched, and as Ethan's flashlight beam passed over it, the figure shimmered. For a moment, Ethan saw himself standing there, grinning madly, eyes black and mouth stretched into a hungry smile. Then the figure was gone, melting back into the shadows. They stumbled down the stairs, heart pounding, every instinct screaming, "Run!" The house groaned around them, as if laughing. Back in the upstairs hall, Ethan slammed the attic door shut and jammed a broken chair under the handle for good measure. Claire collapsed against the wall, trembling. Ethan opened the journal again. He flipped to the last page and felt the blood drain from his face. There, scrawled in red, were 3 words. "It's too late." Claire saw it too. Her voice broke. "No, it's not." Ethan forced himself to think, to move. The journal said there were keys. Body, blood, mirror. They had the mirror, the one wrapped in cloth. They needed to find the other 2, and fast. The knocking would return. The whispers would grow louder, and eventually the midnight door would open wide, if they didn't seal it first. Claire gripped his hand so tightly it hurt. "What do we do?" He looked at her, really looked, not just at her face, but at her reflection. In the hall mirror behind her, for now, the 2 matched. For now, Ethan swallowed the rising tide of fear. "We fight," he said, because they had no choice. The house wasn't just haunted, it was hungry, and it had started to feed. Ethan and Claire didn't waste time. The longer they stayed still, the more the house shifted, floors warping, walls breathing, doorways stretching into places they didn't belong. The journal sat heavy under Ethan's arm. It pulsed with the same anxious energy that seemed to flood the house itself. Claire clutched the cloth-wrapped mirror against her chest, careful not to meet. "It's gaze again. Where do we even start?" she whispered. Ethan flipped through the journal one last time, searching. There, hidden among diagrams of the mirror rite, a footnote scribbled in a shaky hand. "Body is buried in the root cellar." beneath the house. She watches over it. Trust. Nothing you see. Ethan looked up grimly. The basement. Claire paled. Of course it would be the basement. The door to the basement was at the back of the kitchen, a battered thing with rusted hinges and a deadbolt. When Ethan touched it, it was cold enough to burn. He tried the handle, it turned easily. The door swung open on silent hinges, revealing a narrow staircase plunging into darkness. A smell wafted up. Wet earth, old stone, and something sweeter, more putrid. Claire gagged, covering her mouth. Ethan switched on the flashlight again. The beam flickered once, twice, before settling into a dim, sullen glow. "I'll go first," he said. Claire shook her head fiercely and grabbed his arm. "We stay together." They stepped down into the dark. The basement was wrong. Worse than the rest of the house. The ceiling pressed low overhead, and the walls wept with moisture. The floor underfoot was packed dirt, pitted and uneven. Something dripped steadily in the distance. Plip, 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 like a leaky faucet, except there were no pipes here. Ethan swept the light across the space, rusted tools, collapsed shelves. Something that looked like a child's doll, face half melted. And at the far end, a doorway, a frame set into the stone wall, leading to a root cellar beyond. Claire's hand tightened on his jacket. They moved forward, slow and careful. The whispering started again, faint at first, brushing against their ears like cold breath. Ethan ignored it. Focus. They reached the doorway. The root cellar was smaller, roughly circular, dug into the earth itself. The air was colder. Here, heavy with the stink of dampness and decay. In the center of the room was a mound of dirt, roughly man-shaped. Shallow breathing filled the space, though neither of them moved. Claire whimpered. The mound twitched. Ethan raised the flashlight higher. The thing in the dirt wasn't fully buried. A hand protruded, grey, shriveled with long, broken nails. It flexed weakly as the beam touched it, as if sensing them. Beneath the loose soil, something shifted, as if trying to rise. Ethan backed up a step. The journal had called it body. But it wasn't just a corpse. It was still aware, still moving, still waiting. Claire's voice shook. "What do we do?" Ethan racked his brain. The journal mentioned the keys were objects, separated parts of her. If the body was here, they needed something from it. Not the whole thing, just a piece, a relic. He scanned the mound. There, around the exposed wrist, something glinted, a bracelet. Silver, tarnished almost black, carved with strange symbols. Ethan's stomach turned. He knew instinctively. That was the key. He stepped forward cautiously. The mound shifted again, and the hand groped blindly. Closer now, Ethan could see the bracelet wasn't just worn. It was embedded into the flesh, fused by time and rot. He clenched his teeth. There was no easy way. He reached out. His fingers brushed the cold metal. Instantly, the mound convulsed. The dirt exploded outward as the thing surged up. Claire screamed. Ethan stumbled back, clutching the bracelet. The thing clawed at the air, empty eye sockets weeping black fluid, mouth opening in a silent, endless scream. It wasn't human anymore. It wasn't even a ghost. It was a husk, a leftover shell animated by hatred and hunger. The husk lunged at Ethan. He dodged barely, falling hard onto his side. Claire grabbed a broken piece of wood from the ground and swung wildly, striking the creature across the head. It reeled back with a wet, cracking sound, but didn't fall. It couldn't die. Not here. Not yet. Ethan scrambled to his feet, shoving the bracelet deep into his pocket. He grabbed Claire's hand and ran. The husk staggered after them, dragging one ruined leg behind it. They tore through the basement, up the stairs two at a time. The thing slammed into the bottom of the staircase just as Ethan kicked the basement door shut. He threw the bolt, trapping it below. for now, but the door shuddered violently as the husk beat against it from the other side. Both of them leaned against the door, gasping for air. Claire sobbed once, covering her face. Ethan pulled the bracelet from his pocket. Up close, it seemed to pulse with a faint, sickly light. The symbols on it shifted when he wasn't looking directly at them. It felt like holding a live snake, tense and writhing in his hand. But it was their first key. 1 down, 2 to go. The house moaned around them, the floor beneath, their feet trembling. Claire wiped her face and said thickly, "How are we supposed to survive this?" Ethan didn't answer. He didn't know. The journal had warned them. Once you started gathering the keys, the house would fight harder to stop you. And something else was waking up behind the midnight door, growing stronger with every passing minute. Claire's gaze fell on the cracked kitchen window. Her reflection looked back. But for a terrifying heartbeat, it moved out of sync, smiling when she didn't. She jerked away with a gasp. "We're running out of time," she whispered. Ethan nodded grimly. They needed the second key. Blood, and if he had to guess, it would cost them far more than just courage. It would cost pain. And maybe worse. He clutched, the bracelet tightly, feeling its strange pulse against his palm. Above them, faint but distinct, came the sound of knocking. Not at the front door, not at the basement, but from the inside walls. The knocking was moving, seeking, trying to find its way through. Ethan looked at Claire. "No more running," he said, voice low and steady. She wiped her eyes and nodded, fierce and desperate. "Let's finish this." They turned toward the stairwell that led deeper into the heart of the house, toward the place where the second key waited, toward the place where blood would be demanded. The house was alive. Ethan could feel it now, pulsing with a sick rhythm, breathing through the warped walls, murmuring behind the cracked wallpaper. Every step toward the second key felt like trudging deeper into a living body, into a heart filled with rot. Claire walked beside him, the mirror clutched tightly to her chest, her other hand ghosting over the bracelet in Ethan's pocket as if needing reassurance. Neither spoke. There were no words left big enough to cover what was coming. The staircase leading down from the kitchen led not to another basement, but to something stranger, something wrong. The steps twisted unnaturally, curving sideways and inward, as if the house itself was folding in on itself. The deeper they went, the more the light from Ethan's flashlight struggled, swallowed by the darkness that pressed against them like a physical thing. Finally, the stairs ended in a narrow hallway. The walls were lined with doors, each door identical, peeling white paint, brass handles smudged with fingerprints, and each door breathing, faintly rising and falling, as if it were a lung. Claire shuddered, violently. "This wasn't here before," she whispered. "No," Ethan agreed. The house was changing itself, creating. He checked the journal again. There, scrawled in a tight corner of the page, "Follow the bleeding door. Only blood reveals blood. The price must be paid." They moved down the hall cautiously, Ethan's flashlight sweeping over each door in turn. Nothing. Nothing. Then, the third door on the left. A dark stain bloomed beneath it, spreading sluggishly across the floor, thick, dark red. Blood. Claire recoiled, covering her mouth. Ethan steeled himself. This was it, the second key, and they would have to pay for it. He reached for the doorknob. It was slick with blood, but he turned it anyway. The door swung inward with a low, wet creak. Inside was not a room, it was a memory. Ethan blinked, disoriented. He stood now in a small hospital room, sterile and cold. The walls were peeling. The lights flickered weakly overhead. In the bed lay a figure, frail, gasping, covered in sweat, and beside the bed, a little boy, no more than 10 years old. crying silently. "Ethan," Claire's voice drifted from behind him. She was here too, her face pale with shock. "You know this place?" she asked. Ethan's throat was dry. He couldn't speak. He did know it. It was the day his mother died, the memory he never spoke of. The one he buried so deep he forgot the details. Only the guilt remained. The boy knelt beside the bed, clutching the woman's limp hand. "Please," he sobbed. "Please don't go." The woman's mouth moved weakly. "No more crying, baby. You're stronger than this. You have to be." Her eyes flickered, dying, but full of love. The heart monitor flatlined. The boy screamed, and the world dissolved into blood. The floor under Ethan's feet split open. Blood geysered up from the cracks, swallowing the room whole. He stumbled, backward, grabbing Claire, who cried out in horror. The hospital dissolved. The hallway returned. But the door, the bleeding door, was no longer just a door. It had morphed into a gaping mouth, lined with broken teeth, breathing in the heavy dark. In the center of the mouth floated an object, a vial, suspended in the air, spinning slowly. Inside, a thick, viscous liquid, darker than blood, almost black. The second key. Blood. Claire reached for it instinctively, but the mouth snapped shut with a deafening crack, the teeth grinding together inches from her hand. She recoiled, gasping. A voice whispered from the walls, "A price must be paid, blood for blood." Ethan understood now. They couldn't just take it. The house demanded sacrifice. It wanted blood, their blood. Ethan pulled a small pocket knife from his jeans. It wasn't much, just a tool for camping. But it would do. He turned to Claire. "I'll do it." She shook her head fiercely. "No, we both do it." He hesitated. Claire looked up at him, fierce despite the terror on her face. "We're in this together." He nodded. Together they pressed the knife to their palms. Claire went first, a quick, shallow slice across her hand, her blood welling bright and hot. Ethan followed, gritting his teeth as the blade kissed his skin. They held their bleeding hands over the mouth. For a moment, nothing happened. Then, the house shuddered. The mouth convulsed. It inhaled. A sick, wet sound, drinking in their blood. And the vial dropped from the air, clattering to the floor. Ethan grabbed it quickly, ignoring the way it seared his skin. The mouth shriveled and collapsed into itself, leaving only an empty, blood-stained frame behind. They staggered back into the hall. Ethan cradled the vial carefully in one hand, the bracelet stuffed in his pocket. With the other, Claire wrapped her scarf tightly around her wounded hand, wincing. "2 keys," she whispered. "One left." The mirror, the third key, was still wrapped safely against Claire's chest. For now. But Ethan knew the house wouldn't let them reach the midnight door so easily. It was fighting back harder now. The blood sacrifices had only whetted its appetite. The walls trembled. A low rumble filled the hallway, and a roar of whispers rose, loud enough to make Ethan stagger. The doors along the hall, dozens of them, began to open. One by one, figures poured out, twisted reflections of themselves, mocking versions, wide-eyed, drooling, muttering in broken, half-familiar voices. Ethan grabbed Claire's hand and ran. They sprinted for the stairs as the mockeries gave chase. Their footsteps slapped against the wooden floor. The whispers behind them grew louder. Anger, hunger, despair. A tidal wave of madness chasing them upward. They burst into the kitchen, slamming the door behind them. Ethan turned the lock, but he knew it wouldn't hold long. Claire collapsed against the counter, gasping. The mirror rattled. Under the cloth against her chest, Ethan pulled the vial of blood from his jacket and placed it carefully on the table next to the cloth-wrapped mirror and the bracelet. 2 keys gathered. One more step to the mirror right. One more step to ceiling. The midnight door forever, or being swallowed whole. The house groaned. The knocking started again. But now it wasn't just from the front door. It came from inside the walls, inside the floors. Inside them, the final battle was drawing near. Claire looked up at Ethan, blood staining her scarf, terror and grim determination in her eyes. "You know what's next," she said. Ethan nodded. They had to open the midnight door. They had to face her, and they had to win, because there were no second chances left. The house was collapsing into madness. The walls convulsed like muscles. The floor heaved and shivered under their feet. Every window showed not the outside world, but endless, writhing blackness, like the house had slipped loose from reality itself. The midnight door waited. At the far end of the hall, past the kitchen, past the breathing walls and howling corridors, it stood, a simple thing, black wood, silver handle, no keyhole, no cracks. Just smooth, perfect darkness, and behind it, her. The thing that had been pulling the strings from the start, the house's creator, the house's prisoner, the house's queen. Claire wrapped the bracelet tightly around her wrist. Ethan tucked the vial of blood into his jacket pocket and adjusted the mirror under Claire's arm. All three keys, body, blood, mirror, together. They would perform the mirror rite, a ritual Ethan barely understood, even after reading the journal dozens of times. But it didn't matter now. They had no choice. Either they sealed the midnight door, or they would never leave this place. Never be themselves again. They approached the door together. The floor beneath them cracked open in places, revealing gaping maws lined with splinters and broken glass. Hands, too many hands, reached up from the dark, clawing, pleading, trying to pull them under. Claire cried out as one seized her ankle. Ethan kicked it away, feeling the sickening crunch of brittle bone under his boot. They ran the last few feet. Ethan reached for the handle. The midnight door was ice cold, burning against his skin like dry ice. He turned it. It didn't move. The journal had warned them. The door could only be opened when the keys were offered. He turned to Claire. Together, they knelt. Ethan uncorked the vial, letting a single drop of the black blood drip onto the floor before the door. Claire unwound the bracelet and placed it beside the blood. Finally, she unwrapped the mirror and set it down carefully between the two. The glass reflected nothing. No floor, no faces, no light, only a yawning void. They joined hands over the mirror. Ethan's voice trembled as he recited the rite, word for word from the journal. Blood from body, flesh from bone, mirror cracked and breaking, midnight door, open wide, we come to end the waking. The house shrieked. The sound wasn't human. It was metal tearing, earth splitting, a million voices screaming in unison. The keys glowed. The blood sizzled against the floor. The bracelet liquefied into quicksilver. The mirror shattered silently into 1,000 fragments, and the midnight door opened. Beyond it was no room, no hall, only a great blackness, deep and cold. A space too vast to comprehend, filled with the stink of rotting flowers and ancient dust. From the dark, she emerged. At first, she looked human, tall, pale, with long black hair and a flowing white dress. Her eyes were endless, mouthless. Her hands trailed ribbons of smoke where her fingers should have been. She smiled without a mouth. The house seemed to lean inward toward her, trembling like a dog before its master. Ethan froze. His mind reeled, fighting to hold on to reality. Claire gasped, stumbling backward, clutching at her temples. She was beautiful and terrible and absolutely wrong. "Who calls me?" Her voice echoed inside their skulls, not heard, but felt. "Who dares?" Ethan straightened. He forced his mouth to work. "We're here to end it," he said hoarsely. Claire found her voice too, shaking but fierce. "You don't belong here anymore." The thing that wore a woman's shape tilted its head, studying them. For a moment, Ethan thought maybe, just maybe, it would let them go. Then it smiled wider, and the real fight began. The house exploded into movement. Chairs, tables, doors, knives, everything became a weapon. The walls birthed shadow creatures, all teeth and claws. The floor opened and closed, snapping like a jaw. The house itself fought to defend its queen. Claire screamed as a shard of glass whirled past her cheek, cutting deep. Ethan dodged a slashing claw, feeling it tear through the sleeve of his jacket. There was no escape, no retreat, only forward, only through. Ethan grabbed the largest shard of mirror from the floor. It thrummed in his hand, vibrating with an unseen power. The journal had hinted, the mirror cuts through lies, through flesh, through illusions. He charged. The Queen of the Midnight Door shrieked, extending one smoky hand toward him. The walls screamed as they cracked. The mirror shard blazed with silver fire. Ethan slashed. The Queen recoiled, smoke pouring. From the wound, the dark fabric of her form unraveling where the mirror touched. But she wasn't defeated. She struck back, a wave of black force that sent Ethan crashing against the far wall. Claire ran forward. She scooped up the broken bracelet, now molten metal, and hurled it at the Queen. It struck her chest, burning a hole through the illusion, revealing, for just a moment, the twisted horror underneath. Not a woman, not a ghost, something older, hungrier, made of want and absence. Ethan staggered to his feet. Blood trickled from his mouth. He gritted his teeth and charged again. This time Claire was right behind him. Together, they drove the mirror shards deep into the heart of the thing. The Queen shrieked, the house shrieked, the world shrieked, and the midnight door began to close. The Queen grabbed Ethan's arm. Her touch was frost and fire at once, burning his skin, freezing his blood. Visions poured into his mind, promises, lies, desperate bargains. "Stay with me. Be my vessel. I can give you everything you ever wanted. She doesn't have to die." For one awful heartbeat, Ethan almost listened, almost believed, almost surrendered. Claire's voice broke through the madness. "Ethan, look at me!" He turned. He saw her, battered, bloody, terrified, but real, solid, alive. He drove the shard deeper. The Queen's scream shattered the walls. The midnight door slammed shut with a thunderous boom, and the house collapsed, inward. When Ethan woke, it was morning, real morning. The sun streamed through the windows. No blackness, no shrieking walls, no endless void. The house was dead, just an empty shell now, cracked wood, dust, silence. He sat up, wincing. Claire lay nearby, stirring slowly. They were alive, broken, bloodied, but alive. They staggered out of the ruined house together into the golden light of a new day. Neither spoke for a long time. There were no words big enough for what they all had survived. No explanations for what the house had been, or what it had cost. The midnight door was sealed. The Queen banished, for now. But sometimes, on the edge of sleep, Ethan could still hear it. A faint, rhythmic knocking from somewhere deep beneath the earth, waiting for another key, another opening, another chance. A year passed. The house on Wren Hollow Lane stood empty, condemned. A weathered sign hung crooked on the broken gate. Danger. Keep out. No one came near it. No one spoke about it, except in hushed whispers at the diner on Main Street. where old men stirred their coffee and swore they heard knocking when they drove past at night. The town of Marrow Creek let the house rot, forgotten, buried, like a wound under layers of scar tissue. Ethan hadn't been back. Neither had Claire. They had promised each other from no more midnight doors, no more ghosts. They moved on, or tried to. Ethan worked construction now, honest and grounding, the kind of job that left his body too exhausted at night to dream. Claire opened a tiny bookstore in a nearby town, painting the walls bright yellow and stocking it with flowers and worn paperbacks that smelled like rain. They called each other sometimes, not often. There were things between them, memories, too heavy for daily conversation. But the bond remained, forged in blood and terror and survival. Some things were too strong to break. Tonight, Ethan sat on his small apartment balcony, a beer sweating in his hand, staring at the stars. The air smelled like wet grass. A good night, a quiet night. He should have felt at peace. Instead, an unease gnawed at his chest. Quiet and persistent, the kind of fear you can't explain, the kind you can't talk yourself out of. His phone buzzed on the table beside him. Claire, he answered immediately. "Hey," he said. "Hey," she breathed. Her voice was tight, strained. "You feel it too?" he asked. A beat of silence, then, "Yeah." Neither needed to say what it was, the house, the door. Her something was shifting, turning, awakening. "Dreams," Claire said after a moment. "Every night now?" Ethan swallowed. Same. He didn't tell her everything, didn't tell her about the dreams. Where he was standing before the midnight door again, the handle frozen against his palm, a voice whispering behind it. "You never really closed me out. You only locked yourself inside." Didn't tell her about the way mirrors sometimes rippled when he passed, the way shadows seemed to cling too long to his heels, the way he still heard knocking sometimes, faint and polite from the inside of his closet or under his bed. Claire exhaled shakily through the phone. "I don't know how much longer we can pretend it's over," she said. "Maybe it's not pretending," Ethan said. "Maybe it is." Another silence. Not empty. Waited. Finally, Claire said, voice steady, "We need to go back." Ethan closed his eyes. He had known she would say that. He had known it the moment he saw the first ripple in the mirror. The story wasn't finished. The door wasn't finished, and some debts demanded full payment. The next night, they met in front of the house. It looked worse than Ethan remembered, sagging into itself, like it had aged centuries in a single year. The grass was waist-high and brittle. The porch steps crumbled under their weight as they climbed. The front door hung open, inviting. Inside, the air was colder than winter. Breath puffed white from their mouths. Their flashlights barely pierced the gloom. The house wasn't empty. It watched them. It remembered them. And it was hungry. They moved quickly. Down the main hall, past the ruins of the kitchen, past the collapsed stairs, straight to the place where the midnight door had once stood. There was nothing there now. Just a blank wall, painted over with flaking layers of old blue. Claire touched the wall. Her hand disappeared into it. The surface shimmered like water. Without hesitation, she stepped through. Ethan followed. They emerged into blackness. No up, no down. Only dark, only cold. A new space, deeper than the house had ever allowed them to go. And there, ahead of them, the door. Still closed, still waiting, still whole. But now it was different. Cracks spiderwebbed the surface. The handle gleamed, slick with something like oil or blood or both. The air vibrated with a low, droning hum that set Ethan's teeth on edge. The Queen was still alive. Weak, but not dead, not finished. Claire moved forward, pulling something from her pocket. A shard of the mirror. She had kept it all this time. Not for nostalgia, for war. She pressed it to the door. The surface rippled, screamed. Cracks widened. But the door didn't fall. The Queen's voice whispered around them. Not angry, not pleading, not monstrous. Sweet, soft, sick. I can give you peace. I can give you home. Just open the door. Just a little. Just enough. Claire faltered. Ethan grabbed her hand. No, he said. He pressed his forehead against the cold wood, spoke the words he had never said aloud, not even to Claire, not even to himself. I'm not afraid of you. He meant it, and that truth was a weapon. The door began to crumble. Piece by piece, flakes of darkness falling away into nothing. The Queen screamed, not words now, but raw noise, fury and terror and despair, all tangled together. The blackness began to pull inward, collapsing, sucking the door, the space, the Queen back into itself. Ethan grabbed Claire, holding tight. The force tried to drag them in, but they held fast. They chose to stay real. They chose the world. The midnight door vanished, gone. For real, this time. No lingering dreams, no unfinished promises, only silence, only stars. They found themselves standing outside again. Morning light creeping over the horizon. The house behind them crumbled in on itself, collapsing with a final dusty sigh. Gone, eaten by its own darkness. Nothing left to haunt, nothing left to fear. Claire turned to Ethan. What now? She asked, voice hoarse. Ethan looked at her, really looked, and smiled. Now, he said, we live. They walked away, hand in hand. The sun rose higher, and this time there was no knocking behind them, only the sound of the wind, and the beginning of a life no longer borrowed.